by the way.
Fantastic optimism.
Hashtag.
It's through the emergent strategy work put forth by Adrienne Marie Brown, right? And that is, I have to continue to hold some space around, well, what might it look like if things were dismantled? I can't sit in a space of, let me say it this way. I choose not to live in a space only of, it's built into everything that exists in this country, therefore it'll never go away. I hold true that racism is embedded in everything that we do. I also hold space to think, well, what if it didn't? Because I think that's the space that we have, those of us with the privilege and the luxury to have time in our lives for that sort of imagining, for that sort of fantastic optimism. And I think that is a privilege. I think if you're trying to feed your family and you have to be on the front line as an essential worker, whereas before you were just a worker who was making less than $15 an hour and told make it enough. But now all of a sudden you're essential to the very functions of this country. I get that you don't have the privilege to sit around and think about what would the world look like if I didn't have to have this, if I didn't have to struggle like this every day, because you're just trying to get through the day to day. And so I take that as my responsibility as a person with privilege to say, what are the ways that I can imagine life like if these structures and systems didn't exist to oppress me?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the point of that beyond an intellectual exercise?
Because if you don't, this is going to be real trite, but I do believe it. If you can't believe it, you can't achieve it. I think if you only stay limited in deconstruction, then the goal is only about deconstruction.
Out my business. I've said it all 5 seasons. Burn, Hollywood, burn. I see a riot going on. First they guilty, now they gone. Yeah, I check out a movie, but it'll take a black one to move me. I live in that street because for me, the only option is take the Constitution, tear it up and say, let's try again. So there is some interesting hope that you're saying that I've never thought of.
I don't know another way to be. So think about it this way. When enslaved Africans were toiling away and getting up every day and continuing to do that, I cannot understand how they would have survived and thrived outside of the context of dreaming a better world for the next. If you didn't have that level of fantastic optimism, I don't see how I'm sitting here today. If you look at what Black people did in the time after the ending of slavery and in between that and Jim Crow, the shit that we did was absolutely amazing. Think about the amount of progress that we made in that time.
Right.
It's because we didn't have the luxury of relying on the systems that be to give us direction, purpose, structure, understanding. We had to create it on our own. So as long as we sit in this lane of only relying on engaging in the current system, then all we will do is continue to reinforce and give credibility to the current system. And I'm not saying that there isn't some practical, grounded, tangible reality in that, but I also know you have to have a vision bigger than that to see, have any expectation there will be something beyond that.
Now, I'm not one to sit here and say that I'm going to go on this fantastic voyage with you, but I am one to say that that is an interesting perspective. It is an interesting perspective. And I think that's also the fundamental difference between you and I also. It's very clear that I'm a deconstructionist. As positive as I am, I do tend to be a deconstructionist. I do believe that while hope is essential and it's an essential part of the coaching and stuff I do, I think some systems need to be dismantled. because they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, as a metaphor, if I say, you know what, this is not the house for me. I don't like it. I don't like the setup. I'm going to tear it down. Where are we sleeping?
Well, so, and we'll see that this is why you need me as your coach, because before you tear it down, I'm going to make sure you in another house. We're going to get you in some SMART goals and get you over in another house, then burn. You know, my mama taught me you don't leave one job until you got another. Right. So since I can't really leave America, I mean, theoretically I could, but like, where would I go?
Because let me tell you something. Ain't nowhere on this planet where you ain't black, dude.
And so when you travel the world and you realize that racism is universal, you also realize that in America, you're able to manage racism a little bit better. Now, again, I say that, but then again, I say, as you were speaking and talking about the optimism and the thought and thinking about what if it wasn't, I'm saying to myself, right, New Zealand. I noticed for a minute she said New Zealand. Let me move to New Zealand and get myself a hobbit house and live happily ever after. Yes. No, but there really is this concept for me of, I may think differently if I was one of those brothers who was stopped by police coming from the train and asked where I was going and what's in my bag. Like, that kind of thing has never happened to me, right? Mm-hmm. If I was one of those brothers who just, you know, walking into some place or out of some place was witness to, victim of some sort of drive-by or something like that. Like, I navigate in spaces where that's not my experience. So I realize that I have the privilege to sit here and say, in theory, oh, burn it down. But how exactly, and I think what you're saying is really powerful, how does that help the person who doesn't have hope and all they see is oppression all around them? How do we help that person navigate the healthcare system, the educational system, the employment system? Like, how do we really reach out to that person and do it? And I kind of like what you're saying here as an alternate to doing that.
Yeah. Aisha says, being an educated Black American elsewhere in the world is a privilege, and I'm looking forward to exploring that.
As well, you should, honey. All I'm going to say
is that passport is on fire in whatever safe drawer, whatever she keeps in her house. I know it's just ready to get all the stamps.
Mine is getting a little bit of dust right now, but you know, I'm ready to go. Ready to go.
Ready to go. I just think that is so necessary, Tomas. I agree. The hope is important, but I also think like the directed hope is important. Mm-hmm. I think directionless hope can actually be damaging.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But that hope is directed and funneled in some way, shape, or form.
And this is where we have to start talking about education as not being a formalized go to high school, go to college, get a degree, and move forward, but start looking at opportunities that would allow people to make those informed and critical decisions in such a way that is reflective of their life, their education, experience, their interests. Like, we can't funnel people into places where they don't either want to be or would not achieve or do well, right? And so, to me, by saying what you're saying, you're also saying we should take a serious look at how children get nutrition. Take a serious look at how children are educated. Take a serious look at how we start providing alternative paths to education that don't lead people into college and into debt. Like, people are talking about Kim Kardashian going and apprenticing for 4 years to get her law degree. I think what's amazing about that is you are able to do that in California. You don't have to go to law school in California to become a practicing lawyer. You can do it through apprenticeship. And while people are disrespectful of that and pushing back, I need everyone to realize that prior to education and higher education being so, quote, accessible, in air quotes, for people would apprentice for their jobs. That's how they do
it. I think that's a great example. I'm getting a note that we have 40 seconds remaining on this live for Instagram, so I want to make sure that we don't just get cut off.
We are.
Down to 33 seconds. We're going to just get cut off. I want to thank everybody that was able to join us so far. We're going to probably wind down the podcast on the Zoom link in a few more minutes. And I think this has to be a continued conversation, especially this last.
Yeah. If you want to continue the conversation, go to Spreaker.com/TOMASIANENT. That's where the podcast will continue.
And we're gone. Bye. Share to story. Okay. That's awesome. I can take these out now. And I do want to wrap up.
We're still here, Dr. Nikki.
I know. Can you hear me? Oh, you can't hear me.
You there?
Yes.
Oh, hold on. Let me. I muted you in this place. Okay, I hear you now. I'm back.
How dare you?
I know. How dare you mute me?
But I do want to start to wrap this up as well. So I love what you were saying, because that's exactly the way that I have been really trying to rethink about things and approach my way of embodying social justice and fighting towards equity, living a life towards equity, is what you're saying. Like, I think so many things need to be reimagined. I've as a person who was highly successful in the public education system in the United States, I've always said that it was not set up in any functional way for any other part of our society. Like, it doesn't work for working parents in terms of the hours. It doesn't work for the way children are socially, emotionally developing. It doesn't work for children's cognitive development. It just doesn't make sense, right? And so I think that example that you gave is the sort of space that I wish all of us could sit in. What I really envision is, for those of us that are informed and or passionate about or dedicated to whatever topic that is, the reality is systemic structural racism, oppression is so embedded in everything that it's not such a thing as too many hands on deck. We literally need all hands on deck, right?
Until we get a handle on all of this. Like, yes.
All hands
yes.
on deck.
Absolutely,
and so,
yes.
What are where are folks that are in the education realm? How are they envisioning and dreaming and thinking about it? Because I will say again, once the house is burnt down, what are you building it back up with?
Right.
Because if the house gets burnt down and I only go to the same lumber yard and get the same wood and build it on the same foundation, what have I done? What is different?
It's interesting you asked that question. I did a podcast last week, the Writing Remix podcast, and it's two faculty members at the UCSC writing program, and Dan and Katie, Professor Dan, Professor Katie. And one of the interesting things they shared was in working with their class, they decided, instead of like using the criteria that would exist in the classroom, as in, okay, send me your paper, send it to me, da-da-da-da-da. They said, well, we have to finish our final projects. We have to do this. We have to do these things. How do you want to grade yourself? Like, what would work for you? And so as a collective, they had the whole classroom come up with rules and criteria that they would utilize as a group in order to be graded. And it was powerful. And I made mention of that to them. I said, I think the most powerful point of that is you were teaching them a life lesson that they may not realize is so important now, because you were teaching them